Speaker, I rise to make my presentation, the Budget 2019. And Mr. Speaker, before I get into my main presentation, first of all, I would like to say that the Minister, the Honorable Minister who spoke just now, the Honorable Minister of Education, she used a lot of figures, but if you look at the Global Human Capital Index report for 2017, and as we said, figures don't mislead us. So between 2015 to 2017, the country's global ranking, equality of primary education of children aged 0 to 15 years fell by 7th place. So that's the fact. So they're taking credits. They're taking the credits, but when they mess it up, they don't want to take it. And these are the people messing up the country for the last 3.5 years. And then again, the report went on, Mr. Speaker, quality of educational services provided to children aged 15 to 24 declined by 8 points. That's the report of the Global Human Capital Index 2017. And Mr. Speaker, yesterday we sat in this honorable house and we listened to an honorable member from Region 6. And when we come to this house, we must be truthful in our discourse. We must not bring misinformation to this honorable house, because this house is the highest law-making body in our country. And we must not come here and misinform the house. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the honorable member, Mr. Charandas Prasad, said that a new maternity hospital is being built, or a new maternity ward is being built at the New Amsterdam Hospital. But he said also, because when he said that, he was saying that there was no ward there. Two pregnant mothers were sleeping on one bed. And since, Mr. Speaker, I have spoken to a number of persons who have worked since the establishment of that new hospital in New Amsterdam, and all of them, Mr. Speaker, deny, and that is misinformation that the honorable member brought to this house. And Mr. Speaker, he went on and said that the honorable member, Charandas Prasad, went on and said that the Cogen facility at Skelden is a white elephant. Mr. Speaker, as I am speaking here today, that Cogen, the turbine which is being powered by bagasse, one is working presently and is producing 12 megawatt of electricity in the national grid. And Mr. Speaker, the two turbines, they have capacity to produce 30 megawatt to put into the national grid, but because of the incapacity of GPL to handle the load, they can't work both turbines. That is another misinformation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and then the honorable member went on and said that sugar workers who were fired in at Rosal, most of them have been rehired. Mr. Speaker, that is far from the truth. Mr. Speaker, that is far from the truth, because the honorable member will tell you, anytime he sees sugar workers, he's trying to hide in from them. He's trying to move away because the people are abusing him, because he misled them in voting for the AFC, and today they cannot get a job in the sugar industry. Mr. Speaker, those are some of the facts that I want to say. And Mr. Speaker, I will come to you, Justin Ramjatan. I will tell you about the AFC. Mr. Speaker, the budget presentation for me was a long journey to nowhere, as noted in the time it took. Over 4 hours to be presented and horribly short of substance. Mr. Speaker, what could have caused the Honorable Minister to put himself, us here in this Honorable House, and the rest of the country through the tedious and unrewarding journey remain a mystery. If it was an intended distraction from the no confidence motion, then, Mr. Speaker, he would have failed twice. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister took over 4 hours to tell the Guyanese people that there is nothing that could have been conceived or implemented by the government to help improve the lives of the Guyanese. This is extremely shocking, Mr. Speaker, given how this government boasts of bringing a good life to Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, this budget was a public display of master artistry of deception and proved that in terms of words and time spent bring a sum total of 0 for Guyanese. As Guyanese local are saying that the budget was a long and expensive gaffe. Mr. Speaker, and I want to list the deception in this budget. And the honorable member over that side should listen and learn about what is in this budget. And if there is anything in this budget, they should come and tell us. Because, first of all, my colleague, Ms. Priya Manichan, stated just now, the honorable minister stated in the budget that some rice farmers in Berbice, I lived in Berbice, Mr. Speaker, are using drone to sow paddy and fertilize field. Mr. Speaker, I can imagine where the minister went and visited those rice farmers, or the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, I am not sure also if the honorable minister is a fan of things flying in the air and decide to capture that in his speech. Mr. Speaker, but I do not know of any drone sowing paddy in Region 6 or in Region 5, Mr. Speaker. Maybe that is a figment of the minister's imagination. Just like Mr. Speaker, how the AFC felt very politically comfortable at whim. Very comfortable politically at whim. Whims and fancies, I guess, to deceive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and when you look in the entire agricultural sector in our country, and when you see those flowery language in the words in the budget, and you look at the plights of farmers in our country, I think that this government, as Comrade Damon rightly said, I don't care a damn government. I don't care a damn government. Land rental today, the honorable member is from number 47, Honorable Ramjatan. He should go and find out. Land rental today for farmers in Blackbush Polder has gone up from $12,000, Mr. Speaker, to $45,000 per annum. An almost 300% increase, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how are these people expected to survive with such burdens? Mr. Speaker, these burdens that have been placed on the backs of these farmers, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, to compound the situation, this government, they have reduced and stopped the subsidies they have given to the Water Users Association. And as a result, all the secondary canals are being clogged up and blocked. How the farmers will plant. And the honorable member is proud to say that rice production in Region 6 reduced from 62,000 acres to 54,000 acres now. And he's saying why they're planting. May honorable member. Mr. Speaker, when you boast through the heavy-worded budget of dreams and studies, the reality is that people are suffering. And it is increasing with every passing day. Over the last 3.5 years, all the hopes, all the aspiration of the Guyanese people, all the dreams have been dashed by this visionless government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, two of my colleagues on this side of the House spoke. When they spoke, they talk about a masterpiece that was created in Region 6 for the entire country. And on page 7 of the budget, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that the Ministry of Finance, through the Ministry of Health, will be expended $35.9 billion. in the health sector. But Mr. Speaker, are there any money in that budget for the ophthalmology hospital at Port Moran? Mr. Speaker, the ophthalmology hospital, as I said, was an innovative project of the PPPC to improve the quality of eye care in Guyana. And it proved its worth under our government, Mr. Speaker. Today they have left it in ruin. Today no surgery is being done there, and the hospital is almost closed. Almost closed.
It's true.
Mr. Speaker, people from across the country, people from Essecubo, people from Region 1, even people from outside of Guyana and Suriname, Trinidad used to come to that center. As I said, that was a masterpiece in our country to take care of the eye care of our poor and vulnerable. Today, what is the problem in our country, Mr. Speaker? With this government lacks of vision. They want the entire Guyanese to lack vision. Yeah. So that is why they're closing down the ophthalmology hospital. That is the reason they're closing down the ophthalmology hospital. Mr. Speaker, as I said, they lack a lot of vision. And Mr. Speaker, when you hear this government boasting about the good life, who getting the good life or who receiving the good life in our country? Not the people of Guyana, not the poor workers, not the farmers, not the teachers, not the policemen. Everyone in the cabinet. Their phone bills, light bills, water bills, gardeners, maids, all are being taken care of by the state. So they're enjoying the good life. And because of that, they have also hiked their salaries from 50 to 100%. And securities, number of securities, I don't know if they are so afraid of walking the country. This morning, I was at Garnet Street coming through, and I saw Minister Ramjatan with his siren coming out Dell Street, and he blow his siren. I have to go to the corner. Big man, you know, not able to travel in the traffic. Not able to travel in the traffic. That's the powerful man, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, let they enjoy it while it lasts. It's not long more. It's not long more. They will have to answer again. They will have to answer again. Mr. Speaker, another project I want to touch on is the East Bank Public Road, the East Bank Road. Mr. Speaker, there is massive corruption going on in that project. Mr. Speaker, a government or a party activist is doing the recruitment, and the road is not done according to IDB specification and design. Mr. Speaker, the East Bank Berbice Road. Mr. Speaker, $1.2 billion of Guyanese taxpayers' money has been expended or will be expended on that road. And when you go through that road, even from Takama Torn to Edinburgh has not been completed as yet. Imagine when they will meet the Bormine Torn. That is what, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Minister Ramjatan, the honorable member, is defending the project because he went to Berbice. He went to Berbice and fooled the people that the project will complete within a couple of months. Today is a milking cow, is a cash cow. Cash cow for corruption, Mr. Speaker. That's the way that this government, corruption is ingrained in this government. Corruption is in DNA in this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to just touch briefly on the 2019 budget for Region 6. Just a summary I want to give. Mr. Speaker, the 2019 budget for Region 6 is expected to increase by $1 billion. However, of this amount, recurrent expenditure is expected to make up $882 million, or 82% due to an increase in staff by 106. Of the total increase, Mr. Speaker, under the 2019 capital program, less than 3% or $7 million have been allocated to the education sector, which deals with the construction, rehabilitation and extension of schools, teachers' quarters, etc. In other words, Mr. Speaker, on a per capita basis in 2019, this government plans to invest on behalf of every citizen living in Region 6 an additional $63 to help develop their education, the educational sector. $63 more they will spend on the people in Region 6. And Mr. Speaker, the fact is, listen to this fact, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of the Presidency, Department of Citizenship and Immigration Services, with a staff count of 141, will be receiving an additional $14 million in 2019 to spend on telephone and internet charges. Imagine that. Imagine where the priorities of this government lies, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to go on. Similarly, less than 0.5% or $1.5 million of the total increase in capital budget will be invested in the health services sector. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the government plans to spend in 2019 an additional $13 on behalf of every citizen living in Region 6 to help improve health service. $13, Mr. Speaker. $13. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, and listen to this fact.
I'll remember you have 5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, they should know, Mr. Speaker, this government is tone deaf. This government is tone deaf, Mr. Speaker, and believe that they have support in the area where some ministers are from. They should ask the Honorable Prime Minister to advise them. He and his now defunct AFC has fooled the people, especially in Berbice. They made all sorts of promises before 2015, Mr. Speaker, and then realized they have no influence in the government to have even one measure realized. Yet, Mr. Speaker, he's bold enough to turn up in his expensive fancy vehicles that cost taxpayers in Berbice, where the economy has been ravished after the callous closing of the sugar estate. Mr. Speaker, Berbice is reeling from numerous social problems, especially Region 6, as a result of the closure of the estate. People who once had jobs now cannot afford to feed their children, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, here is a heartbreaking story of a mother who said publicly she cannot afford to feed her children. When her children wake up in the night, she has to give them water in the Guyana Times. In the Guyana Times. And hear this one, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Prime Minister say after this, after the closure, and so how the number of workers that were displaced, the Honorable Prime Minister say on Friday last, when my staff raised a toast to me, I remarked that payment of redundancy benefit to sugar workers was my best birthday gift. Redundancy. That's the redundancy, Prime Minister. The Prime Minister who is redundant to our country, Mr. Speaker. The redundant Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, and I want to move on. Mr. Speaker, the government, Mr. Speaker, the government did this to the people. And at whim, Mr. Speaker, at whim, where the Prime Minister is from, the people voted. The people voted and unleashed a tsunami that demolished the AFC and politically banished the Honorable Prime Minister from his place of birth. Banished! Among whim, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister.
I'll remember. You have 2 minutes remaining.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister not being welcome in his own village is the strongest message by the people to say that what was resounding across the country on November the 12th at the local government election. Mr. Speaker, even here in Georgetown, where our party, the PPPC, the only national party, we have gained 5 more seats. 5 more seats where the government believed that they had transport for. Not anymore. We moving, and the party moving with force. So, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support this budget When you look at this budget and you look at the team transforming the economy, our economy is shatters now. Empowering people, you're disempowering the people, you're dismissing people. How you empower them? Building sustainable community for a good life, you destroy Wales, and more, Rosal, Skeldon. Mr. Speaker, the budget should have been destroying the economy, disempowering people, breaking community for a poor life. Thank you very much.
I thank you.